I'm sorry we're a little late in getting going, but there's lots of moving parts, and we wanted to make sure that we get as much information for everybody as possible. Once again, Pam Mitchell, thank you for joining us again today. Here's the update on the city's recovery from Sandy as of this moment. This morning, I went to some of the areas in South Brooklyn hit hardest by the storm, including Coney Island, Seagate, and Gerritsen Beach. I did talk with some homeowners, went inside some of their houses, some that had been severely damaged by Sandy. The homeowners there are still without power. Some of them are still pumping water out of their basements, and they're confronting what they've lost and what to do next. The bottom line is that the most important thing is to deal with those where we had fatalities, help those families through an unimaginably tragic occurrence in their lives, something that they will not recover from, and then understand that the people who've lost their houses or don't know where they're going to get food or water have some confidence that we are going to be there for them, that we are doing what we can as fast as we can, consistent with making sure that we have no further loss of life. So, for example, in turning on power, if there's a chance that turning on power is going to start a fire, we are going to err on the side of caution. If there is an issue of the safety of one of our first responders, we're going to err on the side of caution. We have had building inspectors out there visiting homes. They are posting colored-coded placards, as I described yesterday. Let me just reiterate what a red placard means. It is not a demolition order. If you read carefully what's written on it, it says it's not a demolition order. It is an order not to enter for your safety. A yellow placard requires you to have a safety inspection before entering, and I also want to emphasize that's just because the water may be out of the basement doesn't mean it's safe to turn on an electricity or a boiler or a generator to power your home. There really is a significant fire risk to do so. And one of the things that struck me was people kept thinking that if a generator miraculously showed up in the neighborhood, all would be okay. That's just not the case. When all of the wiring is covered with water, salt water in particular, you have to do a lot of work before you can re-energize those lines. And so we've already seen some cases where when electricity was turned on, there were fires and we lost some other houses. We want to make sure that does not happen. In the case of big buildings that have engineers, they understand that. And in fact, Con Ed has been going around the areas where we have big buildings and having each of those buildings disconnect from the grid if there has been significant damage done to the electrical system in those buildings, so that when Con Ed's ready to turn the power on, and we have some good news there I'll share with you in a few minutes, that it won't start a fire. But when it comes to individual homes, that is much more problematic. And so in these neighborhoods, we're going to have to go door to door. And if we can't get in, then it's a real risk, because if you turn on power in the neighborhood, a fire may start inside. I did see the fantastic work that our city and federal workers and volunteers are doing to help each other in the areas devastated. I shook their hands, I thanked them, and urged all of them to stay safe and to try to get some rest. Many of them have been working close to 24 hours every day. I don't think anybody can fault the devotion that the workers have had, whether they're volunteers or work for the city or one of the state or federal agency. We are in this together. They understand that, and you can see that in their faces. I was talking to our sanitation commissioner, John Doherty, a few minutes ago, and he has a number of people that he visited in one of the garages who've lost their homes, and yet they're still working. And he said, why? And they said, because I want to help my neighbor. And I think that is the spirit that I've always thought New Yorkers have, and particularly New York City workers. We're here to help each other, but we're also, as city workers, here to help the citizens of this great city, and we're going to continue to do that. The death toll from Sandy continues to rise. We now know that at least 41 New Yorkers have perished, and as I cautioned yesterday, as rescue and recovery efforts continue, there could be more fatalities that are discovered. We are getting to the point where we think we've been through every place, but you can never be 100% sure. Yesterday, as I'm sure you heard, first responders recovered the bodies of little Brandon and Connor Moore of Staten Island. Brandon was 2 years old and Connor was 4. They were swept away from their mother's arms by the force of Sandy's storm surge, and it just breaks your heart to even think about it. As a father, I cannot imagine the pain and anguish the boys' parents are suffering. Their father, Damien, is a city sanitation worker. At the time of the tragedy, he was on the job helping our city respond to the storm. I did talk to him this morning and expressed as a parent my deepest sympathies. There's nothing you can ever say to a parent who's lost a child other than you're praying for them, you're praying for their kids, and we will do anything we can to help them. But I think in the end, the loss of a child is something no parent should ever go through. And when they do, it's particularly if you are a parent, you just really feel it. The truth of the matter is, while life in much of our city is getting back to normal, for New Yorkers that have lost loved ones, the storm left a wound that I think will never heal. For those that lost homes or businesses, recovery will be long and difficult, and there are still many around our city facing extremely difficult current situations in the storm's aftermath. For many without power and those who are far from stores and restaurants that are open, fresh food and water is an immediate concern. And as I announced yesterday, we are distributing pre-prepared meals and bottled water to people in the hardest hit areas of the city, including Coney Island, the South Shore of Staten Island, Chinatown and Lower Manhattan, and the Rockaways. We have 13 distribution sites opened, staffed by National Guard members, by New York City service volunteers, and by the staff of the Salvation Army. They distributed something like 290,000 meals and nearly 500,000 bottles of water yesterday. Those sites will be open again today from 1 to 5 p.m. They'll be open tomorrow, Saturday, from 1 to 5, and we'll keep them open as long as they are needed. We do have to come up with a long-term plan for people who will be out of their homes for months and not able to cook and find food, and we are working on that. But our first concern is to meet the immediate needs of people and hope that when electricity comes back to some, the population that will really need our help will be down to a more manageable size. But whatever size it is, I'm convinced that we have the resources and the drive to do so, and the management to do so. Anyone who visits one of our 13 sites will be able to take 3 meals and bottles of water. People should bring their own bags to carry the food and water if at all possible. To publicize their hours and locations of these homes, we've handed out thousands of flyers in English and Spanish and Chinese in the affected areas. Elected officials representing those communities and their staffs are going door to door to help us get the word out. And we've also posted the site locations on the city's website, nyc.gov. AT&T has placed what they call pods, which are trucks with generators in different areas in Zone A that provide charging stations for people's cell phone and also sell coverage for AT&T customers. Many of those are in the vicinity of the food and distribution centers, and that means while you're getting food and fresh water, you can also make calls to loved ones and others who may be worried about you. We've had great cooperation from FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Group, the National Guard, the Salvation Army, and from state officials in this effort, and I want to thank all the individuals, companies, and nonprofits who've donated so generously to the Mayor's Fund to advance New York City. That includes the New York Roadrunners Club, which has donated $1 million to the relief effort, and that amount may go as high as $2 million if the Roadrunners Club has asked, as the Roadrunners Club has asked each runner in this weekend's marathon to also contribute $26.20, which is $1 for each mile of the race, and hopefully some will do a lot more than that. As Mary Wittenberg, the head of the Roadrunners Club, has said, they're running this race to help New York City, and the donations from all of the runners and the clubs are going to be a big leap to our relief efforts. And if you remember, you go back to 9/11, I think Rudy made the right decision in those days to run the marathon. It pulled people together, and we have to find some ways to express ourselves and show our solidarity with each other. We have raised almost $10 million from individuals and corporations, and they include the Helmsley Charitable Trust and their CEO, John Ettinger, John Hess, and the Hess Corporation, my company, Bloomberg LP, the Rudin family, Rupert Murdoch and the News Corporation, ING, Time Warner Cable, Viacom, Rob and Jerry Spire and Tishman Spire, Bank of America, and Ben Stiller and the Stiller Foundation. There have been thousands of other individual contributors too. Thank you. I eventually will find a ways to thank all of you. Anyone who wants to make a contribution of cash should contact the Mayor's office to Advance New York City by calling 311 or going to nyc.gov. The private sector has also given us some supplies, sort of in kind. These companies include Anheuser-Busch, the Coca-Cola Company, where Muda Kent, the head of the company, called me early in this week. The New York Mets and the Wilpon family, Delta Airlines, PepsiCo Foundation, Walmart, and Gristedes. And developers in the city like Two Trees Management have made generators available and other large assets that are a major help in our recovery effort. We don't need generally, however, contributions in kind because that's just the logistics of distributing it are complex, and that's not the long-term need. It's cash that we're going to need to help people through the really tough times and rebuild. Goldman Sachs, through its Urban Investment Group, will match the $5 million that New York City is providing in funding for small businesses affected by the hurricane. These funds will be loaned to businesses in Zone A and other areas where there have been power outages and severe flooding, and the funds are expected to flow to borrowers on an expedited basis 5 to 7 days after application. And loans will range from $5,000 to $25,000 and will help small businesses with working capital repairs and business interruption, among other things. Having said that, most importantly, Mayor's Fund, cash to rebuild. And as I said, all you got to do is nyc.gov or 311. Tonight's major televised benefit concert will undoubtedly raise millions more for Hurricane Sandy relief efforts. And another very important thing New Yorkers can do to help us: give blood. The New York Blood Center, which works with hospitals serving 20 million people in this region, sent out extra supplies to hospitals in advance of the storm. So if you can donate blood to the center, please do. I plan to do it again later today. I think the last time I gave blood was about 2 months ago, but apparently there's enough time has passed so I can do it again, and I will go. It is painless, it is quick, and it's a chance to maybe save a life. Please go to www.nybloodcenter.org for more information. Today we have opened the first of several disaster assistance service centers, which will provide information about applying for emergency social and economic benefits. I visited it and talked with the staff earlier this morning. At the moment, they're working in the parking lot of the MCU Park, the home of the Brooklyn Cyclones, at 1904 Surf Avenue in Coney Island. By next week, they will have moved to a more permanent setting, and when we do, we'll publicize that location and the locations of the other centers we will open. But the most important thing is to start helping as many people as possible as quickly. This center, like other centers we plan to open, is being operated by the city's Human Resources Administration in cooperation with the Federal Emergency Management Agency. And it's open from 5 p.m. today until 5 p.m. today, and will be open 7 days a week. For many New Yorkers, the major challenges posed by Sandy continue to be mass transit and electrical power. First, as to transit, until full subway service is restored, getting around the city will remain a major challenge. Thankfully, more and more travel options are becoming available. You can ride MTA buses, and subway lines are already operating, and those hopefully will come back, the rest of them reasonably soon. We resumed East River ferry service yesterday, and the Staten Island ferry will be back on its full schedule tomorrow. It's already operating. Commuting went better today than yesterday. If you're driving into Manhattan by way of most of our major bridges and the Lincoln Tunnel, the passenger vehicle restrictions we put into place will end at 5 p.m. today, and we expect so much power to be restored and mass transit to be restored that will not be necessary to reinstitute those on Monday. Although if the city is so clogged the way it was last Wednesday, where even emergency vehicles couldn't get around, we will reinstitute these. They did make a very big difference, even though they do impact and inconvenience a lot of people. Safety, once again, is the most potent, the most powerful thing, and the most important thing to us. The Holland Tunnel, I'm happy to say, is being opened on a limited basis for commercial vehicles and buses. That will also help. As many frustrated drivers know, there have been major disruptions in getting gasoline, and that's the next thing I wanted to address. Refineries have been closed. Pumping stations have had no electricity, and some terminals in the region have been closed. So the entire supply chain has been bottlenecked. As of this morning, all of these issues are starting to be alleviated. Power, I'm happy to say, is now back on for the interstate pipeline that serves our city. It's called the Buckeye Pipeline. It comes through Linden, New Jersey, and we expect gasoline from this pipeline to enter our city tonight, and that will make a major difference. We've also been working with the Coast Guard and the Port Authority to unlock a gas barge that has been stuck in the port. It has now gone up the Hudson to Newburgh, where it will unload something like 64,000 barrels of gasoline. That goes into the pipeline that I just mentioned and comes out here. And as we have urged, Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano earlier today issued a temporary blanket waiver that will immediately permit additional oil tankers coming from the Gulf of Mexico to enter northeastern ports. There is a federal law that prohibits foreign flagged carriers from going from one port in America to another in it. They can go overseas, but not from one port to another. The suspension of that law for the time being will make a big difference to us. We also have a plan in place to ensure that police, fire, and other critical service vehicles have the fuel they need, and we're working with the State Department of Health on a plan to ensure that vehicles that serve critically needed patients and elderly get the service they need, and also the buses and school buses. Those are our highest priorities. But the bottom line is that the gasoline system is getting back on its feet. We can expect some lags in how quickly it improves, but I think by Monday, when people stop driving as much and start taking mass transit, that will be another thing. And these delays due to storms have happened before. They spring up very quickly and they go away very quickly. We basically have a supply system. As it comes in, we use it. If it stops coming in, we're in trouble. Once it comes in, we use it up, and it is a very close connection between supply and demand. In the meantime, if you cut out any unnecessary driving, you'll save yourself some time, you'll save yourself some aggravation at a gas pump, and we'll all be better off for it. Con Ed continues to make progress in restoring electric service. Since yesterday at this time, the lights have come back on for about 70,000 more customers across the city. Currently, something like 460,000 customers are estimated to be without power. About half of them are in Manhattan. Con Ed is starting to recover areas in Manhattan today, and the hope is to have power restored to most of the borough by midnight tonight, which is certainly great news. Some of these areas should start coming on within a couple of hours, but what Con Ed has to do is to bring them on one by one and to make sure there are no buildings that could catch fire when they throw the switch. Two networks in Lower Manhattan will take a little longer to bring back online. However, even with the crews working around the clock, it's going to take a lot longer to bring power back to areas that are served by overhead power lines, and that includes the Long Island Power Authority's more than 30,000 customers on the Rockaways. If you are without power and you are using candles, please exercise extreme caution. I know it's chilly. I know you want to have light at night, but don't leave candles burning throughout the night, and don't leave them unattended. We've already had a serious fire in the Rockaways that was started by candles. NYU Downtown and Veterans Affairs Hospital in Manhattan do not expect to open until the middle of the week. The special medical needs shelters will stay open through next week at least. We've had our restaurant inspectors being redeployed to high-impact areas to meet with restaurants and explain how to reopen safely. We want to make sure that people don't get food poisoning from either water that's been contaminated touching the food, or food that has spoiled for lack of refrigeration. We're telling people who live in Breezy Point to boil water before using it, because so many of the water lines there have been damaged. But since most don't have electricity to do this, or gas, the best solution is to use only bottled water, which we're supplying at our 13 distribution sites. For everybody else, we've tested test the water lots of different places, lots of times in the day. It is the safest water you can drink. We've added a little bit of extra chlorine just as a precautionary measure, so if it tastes a tiny bit funny, and I have not noticed that in drinking tap water, but that's what we're doing. It is safe. The only place where we really think that boiling would be appropriate is in Breezy Point. There are currently about 5,500 people in our city's evacuation shelters. About 20% are classified as having special medical needs. We have consolidated those systems. There are now 15 shelters where there were once 76 of them. It's a little bit more inconvenient for some people to get to some of them, but staffing 15 is a lot easier than staffing 75, and we did have a number where there were only half a dozen or a dozen people in them. Now this is much more efficient, and it's going to let us provide better service. This is going to help us get public schools ready for classes on Monday morning as well, because most of these shelters are in the school system. Bus shelters will remain, our shelters will remain open for all people who need them. 311 NYC GOV if you need them. They'll tell you where. The volunteers and city employees manning these shelters have done a phenomenal job, and I just wanted to say thanks to them. In particular, I want to say a few words about Homeless Services Commissioner Seth Diamond and the staff at what is called the United Operations and Resource Center. They have been overseeing the emergency shelter system for the past week, stocking and restocking them, securing emergency generators when shelters lost power, and overcoming every challenge that has been thrown at them. They've had an awful lot of sleepless nights, as many of us have, but I know they're not slowing down, and that is, as I said, true for so many city workers and so many different agencies. About the public schools, they'll reopen for classes on Monday. However, depending on power conditions, we expect something like 40 of these school buildings not to be able to reopen. The schools in those buildings may not be able to resume classes until Wednesday. The Chancellor will try to communicate this information starting this evening and over the weekend through the nyc.gov website, 311, DOE's text messaging service, and through principals and parent coordinators who will try to contact all of the parents directly and on radio and television. But 40 out of the 2,000 schools are the only ones that we think will not be ready to receive students on Monday. And then we're going to have a great challenge. Missing a week of schooling is not something that's good for the education of our kids, and we're going to have to work very hard, as are their parents and the students, to catch up. Getting a great education is the real key to enjoying everything that America has to offer. There are some other updates I wanted to share with you concerning the crane on West 57th Street. Tomorrow, work on securing the crane will begin. It's an approximately 36-hour operation, and the goal is to remove the vacate order and allow people in the vicinity to return to their homes and offices by Monday night. We've just got to make sure that we do this where it doesn't cost any more lives or any lives, and we think we have a plan that's been well studied by everybody, and we've been on the crane and with the workers, and we've photographed everything, and we've studied the blueprints, and we think we have a plan that will, in 36 hours, let us secure the boom to the building, and then over the next 3 or 4 weeks, they'll have to build another crane next to it to take down the pieces that are damaged. Federal agencies are providing equipment, including industrial-strength water pumps, to help with our recovery. We've been working closely with the Board of Elections and doing everything they've asked of us to help them prepare for Tuesday. We'll continue to provide all the assistance we can, but we do not run the Board of Elections. Ultimately, it's going to be up to them to ensure that everyone has a nearby poll site and knows where it is. And we'll do anything we can to help, but the bottom line is they have to find out what's happened to all of the private buildings that have polling sites in them, and then coordinate with us on public sites. As I said yesterday, the majority of the parks and playgrounds will open this weekend. There are a number that are already open. They will open as we can make sure that they are safe. If you look at the park, if there's a sign, "Stay out," please stay out, because it is literally life-threatening. There are trees that can come down, and we've had a number of the 40-odd people that have died from a tree falling on them. Nature is tough, And nobody thinks about a tree falling, but particularly after all of the water we have, there's a lot that are in danger of doing so. But as we think each park is safe, we're going to remove the signs and let you go in. And so a good chunk of them, 50–60%, are probably open already right now. The beaches, stay off the beaches, please. We just do not need to have our first responders jeopardize their lives. Still rough weather out there. There's an awful lot of debris on the beaches and floating around. I know surfing is fun for a lot of people, but it's not worth losing your life. The Department of Sanitation has sent extra crews to clean up debris, and they'll do it on the beaches. First priority is for people in their neighborhoods, the streets, so they can get around, and to help them get their houses in order so they can at least look and see what damage was done and what they have to do next. The Sanitation Department is also picking up garbage wherever possible. There's still no recycling pickup. I think we picked up something like 17,000 tons of stuff yesterday, and in going around the city, every place I hear the same thing. They say great things about all our city agencies, but what you see, the Sanitation Department, it's so visible. They say nothing but great things about it. Before I take questions, let me just try to summarize for our Spanish-speaking New Yorkers. Ayer empezamos a distribuir cientos de miles de botellas de agua y comidas preparadas para los más afectados por el huracán Sandy. Vamos a continuar la distribución de agua y comida hoy de la 1 a las 5 de la noche en 3 centros. Estamos empezando nuevos esfuerzos para ayudar a nuestra ciudad recuperar de esta tormenta. And with that, we'll be happy to take questions. Sir, in the back.
Mayor, yes,
we're only going to take a few questions because I think we've been over this 1,000 times, but go ahead.
The governor, last night sent a letter to Con Ed and other utilities saying you better turn on the lights quickly or we're going to revoke your utility license. I was wondering if you think that they are moving quickly.
I don't. I haven't talked to the governor about that specifically, so I don't know what his thoughts process was. From what we've seen, Con Ed is doing as much work as they possibly can safely. This is an agency that we've worked with extensively over the last dozen years, or 10, 11 years. During our administration, they've sunk an enormous amount of resources, capital into expanding their network. As you know, the last 2 summers when the networks were really stretched, they did not have any appreciable outages. I think they were caught a little bit unawares. Nobody expected, or they didn't expect, and I don't think anybody else did either, a surge as high as this was. The trees coming down are just nothing you can do about. That's always going to be the case when you have overhead power lines. We've had workers from around the country come here. There's all of these reciprocal sharing plans that all of the utilities have. There's been an outpouring of people from around the country. And when you have an overhead line, from what I understand, apparently they're all pretty similar, so a little bit of one-day training and they can go out and actually do the job even if they happen to live and work 3,000 miles away. And that's going to be the big problem after this weekend. Con Ed should have all of the networks up. It's the overhead lines where you've got to go tree by tree, line by line, and you can have it in service and your neighbor cannot. And no matter how frustrating it is, that's just always the case. This was an unusually large number of trees that came down because of the storm. But the real problem for Con Ed is where the storm surge was, because there even the overhead lines in many cases don't exist anymore. And that's going to be a bigger problem to get back. The vast bulk of the people should be back in today or tomorrow. But let's not forget that we're not going to stop, and they're working as hard as they can to get everybody else back up. And I think, from what I can see, I always stop when I see a Con Ed worker and say thank you for taking care of us. Yes, Miss.
Mr. Mayor, on Saturday you told FEMA that you didn't think New York City needed any help. In retrospect, do you think that...
No, that's not fair. We always need, and we're always happy to take as much help as we can, but there are plenty of places that don't have an NYPD, an FDNY, a Department of Sanitation. So when they have big numbers of people to deploy, that's where it really can make a big difference. From FEMA, bottled water, ready-to-eat meals, cash, people on the ground to work with homeowners as to how they apply, but we don't need the big numbers of National Guard people to protect the streets. We have the NYPD. We don't need them to fight fires. We have the FDNY. So at that level, we're happy to get as much help as we can, but we also have to understand we are here to help others, and we're trying to help Nassau County, which in many senses is in worse shape than we are, or other places in upstate New York and into New Jersey.
I don't think it would have been better to have some more of those people here before.
You know, we can be piggy. I think we're Americans, and we have to. FEMA should send the people where they are most in danger, and the rest of us are going to have to live with that. I think one of the things you see about New York is we have, because of the size and because of investments made by administrations before ours and ours, prepared ourselves to take care of ourselves. Probably, it's fair to say, much better than any place else. When you talk to FEMA or you talk to anybody else, they say, you know, they start out by saying, I know you guys have so much, and we start talking to them about whether we can help somebody else at the same time. Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor, will you requisition these generators that private entities own?
There's no provision for the government to requisition anything, and you know, we always can use more generators, but the real problem with generators is the infrastructure. You just don't bring in a generator and plug it in. In a big building, you can do some of that. You can never have enough generators, you can never have enough pumps. The problem always is where you site these things and how you get them when you get them to the right place at the right time. But there's no provision for that. I don't know where that was written. Yes, Miss?
Mr. Mayor, is there any estimate yet in terms of a cost to the city and lost business, tax revenue?
Haven't even looked at it. You know, I mean, in parts of the city, negligible. Some of the, I was talking to somebody that works in a liquor store, and they're basically sold out. People have been buying a lot of wine and hard liquor and having parties. Restaurants, every restaurateur I've talked to, and I've talked to a number of them, business, if they're open, is fantastic. The problem is if you have a store or restaurant in a place with no electricity or in places where there's been enormous damage. And we're working on plans to try to see what we can do. We have, as you know, lots of plans for small businesses, to loans and grants, and to get them going. But how you add up the number, we'll come up with some estimates, and that's all they're going to be eventually. Yes, Miss?
Surely you've heard and read some of the comments from people on Staten Island who feel that it's insensitive to hold the marathon and wonder how it can be said that no resources are being diverted to it. How many city employees are working to support the marathon?
Well, for example, the police department right now has to be at all of the intersections where there's no lights. The lights are going to be back on tonight. Mass transit solves a lot of other problems where the police provide those traffic control resources. It does use some resources, but it doesn't use resources that can really make a difference in recovery and that sort of thing. It's a different group of people. It's a relatively small amount of the sanitation department's resources to do it. And we have to have a city going forward. I don't think there's any question, but there are New Yorkers who've lost loved ones, and nothing's going to ever replace that. People who've lost their homes. We have to make sure that we do everything we can to help them recover. We have to work around the clock for people to get through this thing, and I assure you we're doing that. And if I thought it took any resources away from that, we would not do this. But we have plenty of police officers that work in areas that aren't affected. We don't take all of them and move them into areas that are affected. There will be no diversion of resources. There'll be no redistribution of our efforts, no diminution of our efforts. We have a 24/7 operation going, which I'm confident we're going to do. We have to do everything we can to help people. And when power returns over the next day in mass transit, more people are able to go to their homes. That's going to make a big difference. But as Rudy Giuliani said to me this morning, he said, you know, right after 9/11, people said exactly the same thing. New York has to show that we are here, and that we're going to recover, and that we can, while we help people, still help companies that need the business, still generate a tax base so that we have the resources to help people and give people something to cheer about in what's been a very dismal week for a lot of people. And he reminded me also there was a demand from people that we cancel the New Year's Eve celebration because of a snowstorm. I think Rudy had it right. You have to keep going and doing things, and you can grieve, you can cry, and you can laugh all at the same time. And that's what human beings are good at. Yes, sir.
Mayor, you mentioned the gasoline situation, the Buckeye Pipeline. Does that pipeline service all the 5 boroughs? And do you have any idea?
Yeah, there are some refineries that are closed. There are distribution centers that are closed. It's all... When you get electricity back, an awful lot will come together. When you have mass transit, the demand for fuel should go down. The biggest problem we've had is that the pipeline has been closed. It is now open. We've also had a couple of barges in the harbor that have not been allowed to move to where we need them, one in Brooklyn and one up the Hudson River. Those are going. Napolitano's help with the law that prohibits you from using a foreign flag carrier from one port to another. There are ships that have been loaded in New Orleans who would like to come here, but they can't because they'd be going from one domestic port to another. That's been helpful. And then it's also, people tend to normally drive around with half a tank of gas. Right now, they're so worried they rush to have a full tank, and just the amount of gas stored in all of these cars that's not being used is very significant. Henry, we'll give you the last question.
The Board of Elections contacted you and asked for any help, and what kind of help could the city give to the Board of Elections?
We've reached out to them. I don't know who. I assume there's been enough contact. You can both say that it's gone in both directions, but we've been very aggressive in reaching out to them. We've asked them for lists of where they think they're going to have problems. They've yet to come up with those lists. The governor's got the same problem we do. The Board of Elections is basically run by nobody. It's half a dozen Republicans or 8, whatever it is, and 8 Democrats, and nobody that leads it. And I don't want to just pick on them, but let us be nice and say they've had their problems. And, the ability to vote is something that we fight for and die for around the world. It's a shame if some bureaucrats were to screw it up, and hopefully that won't happen. The voting is it is not just a right, it's a symbol of everything that we fight and die for. Thank you very much.